The air in Courtroom 7B of the federal courthouse was thick with unspoken tension. It hung heavy in the sterile space, a palpable weight that pressed down on the worn wooden benches and the stoic marble bust of Lady Justice. For Marcus Thorne, Lieutenant Commander U.S. Navy SEAL, it was a familiar sensation, though its origin was foreign to his experience. On the battlefield, tension was a warning, a prelude to kinetic violence. Here, it was a slow, simmering acid, born of injustice and the quiet rage of a community seeking retribution. Marcus sat at the witness stand, his back ramrod straight, a living embodiment of the discipline and control drilled into him over a lifetime of service. He was a man accustomed to wearing the anonymous uniform of war, but today, he was dressed in a crisp dark suit, a beacon of civilian normalcy that felt alien and constricting. His skin, a deep, rich mahogany, was a stark contrast to the pale, freckled face of Officer David Sterling, who sat at the defendant's table. Sterling, a man with a reputation for brutality and a history of documented racial profiling, was on trial for the wrongful death of a young black man named Jamal Brooks. Marcus was not just a witness. He was a character witness for the prosecution, an expert called to testify on the use of force, or rather, the egregious abuse of it. For 2 days, Marcus had listened to the testimony, his trained ears cataloging every lie, every contradiction. He had watched the defense attorney paint a picture of Sterling as a beleaguered officer, a hero who had been forced to make a split-second life-or-death decision. Marcus knew better. He had studied the case file, the forensic reports, the grainy, shaky dashcam footage that played on a loop for the jury. He had seen the truth. Jamal Brooks had been a teenager, unarmed, hands in the air, when Sterling had fired the fatal shot. The official story was that Brooks had lunged, but Marcus's expert analysis, honed from years of high-stakes combat, told a different story. The biomechanics of the human body, the trajectory of the bullet, the sheer lack of any threat at all, pointed to one inescapable conclusion: murder. Lieutenant Commander Thorne, the prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Anya Sharma, began, her voice cutting through the silence. You have reviewed the forensic evidence, the witness statements, and the video footage from the incident on June 14th. Yes, ma'am, Marcus responded, his voice a low, steady baritone, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice of a man trained to give precise, unambiguous reports under fire. And based on your extensive experience in high-risk environments, including close-quarters combat and threat assessment, what is your professional opinion of Officer Sterling's use of lethal force in this case? The defense attorney objected, but the judge, a no-nonsense man with a weary expression, overruled it. He was a man who had seen too much of this, and he wanted the truth, no matter how ugly. My opinion, based on the facts presented, is that the use of lethal force was not only unwarranted, but a gross violation of established protocols. The subject, Mr. Brooks, was at a distance of approximately 10 feet, his hands were visible and raised. He was in a state of compliance. There was no discernible threat. The force used was excessive and disproportionate to the situation. A collective intake of breath swept through the courtroom. Sterling's face, which had been a mask of smug arrogance, twitched. His eyes, small and cold, narrowed into slits. Thank you, Lieutenant Commander, Anya said, a small, triumphant flicker in her eyes. Your witness, the defense attorney, a slick, expensive-looking man with a predatory smile, rose to his feet. Lieutenant Commander Thorne, he began, his voice dripping with condescension. You're a SEAL, is that correct? You kill people for a living. I am a U.S. Navy SEAL, sir. My training is in the application of specialized tactics to neutralize threats to national security. And you've seen men die, haven't you? You've put bullets in people's heads. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his composure remained. I have been in combat, yes. So you know what it's like to be in a life-or-death situation. You know the adrenaline, the fear, the necessity of quick action. Officer Sterling was in a similar situation, wasn't he? No, he was not. A life-or-death situation is one in which a subject poses an immediate and direct threat to the life of an individual or individuals. As I stated, Mr. Brooks did not. The defense attorney's smile faltered. He was losing control of the narrative, and he knew it. He took a different tack, one that was more personal, more venomous. You, sir, have a rather interesting background, don't you? You grew up in inner-city Chicago, didn't you? A place where police are, shall we say, not exactly well regarded. The judge pounded his gavel. Counselor, that is out of line. Your Honor, I'm simply establishing the witness's potential bias. The lawyer argued, though his eyes were fixed on Marcus, filled with a sneering, ugly disdain. Objection, Your Honor, the witness's personal history is irrelevant, Anya interjected. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted. Marcus, however, refused to be rattled. He simply looked at the lawyer, his gaze unwavering, a silent challenge. The lawyer, emboldened by his perceived success, pushed further. He glanced at Sterling, who gave him a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. The lawyer's next words came out in a low, conspiratorial tone, meant for the jury to hear. And tell me, Lieutenant Commander, did your service make you forget where you came from, forget your people? Did you think you could come in here and speak to the experience of a good, honest man just trying to do his job? That was it. The subtle implication, the ugly subtext, was now out in the open. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. I speak to the facts, sir, Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, though he never lost his control. And the facts are that a young man is dead because of the actions of a man who abused his authority. My people, as you call them, are the men and women I serve with, regardless of their color, creed, or origin. Officer Sterling, who had been simmering in his seat, suddenly stood. He was a mountain of a man, his police uniform, which he wore with an unsettling swagger, seemed to barely contain his bulk. He pointed a thick, meaty finger at Marcus. You don't know anything about my job. You son of a... The judge's gavel slammed down again. A sharp, cracking sound. Officer Sterling, sit down, now. But Sterling was in a rage, his face a mottled red. He had been a predator for so long, accustomed to the deference and fear of those he policed, that the calm, authoritative presence of Marcus Thorne was a personal affront. It was an insult to his very sense of self. He saw not a decorated officer, but a threat, a man who had defied the natural order of things, a man who had forgotten his place. Don't you look at me like that, boy, Sterling yelled, his voice echoing in the sudden, shocked silence of the courtroom. I served this city. You're just a puppet on a string, a token to make this whole thing look good." Marcus simply stared at him, his dark eyes like obsidian, utterly still. It was the stillness of a coiled snake, a stillness that had saved his life countless times. The defense attorney, a look of horror on his face, tried to pull Sterling back. David, no, but it was too late. Sterling, his mind consumed by a blinding, primitive fury, pushed his lawyer away, his eyes fixed on Marcus. He had been backed into a corner, and like a cornered animal, he was lashing out, not with logic or reason, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. He lunged. The courtroom, so quiet a moment before, exploded. The two bailiffs, middle-aged and slow, were caught completely off guard. Sterling, a man trained in takedowns and holds, vaulted over the table, a roaring force of pure violence. The prosecutor screamed. The jury members recoiled. Marcus, his training screaming at him to engage the threat, was momentarily frozen by the sheer audacity of the attack. He was on a witness stand, in a court of law, not a combat zone. Sterling slammed into him, a brutal, uncoordinated but powerful assault. His fists, like sledgehammers, connected with Marcus's face. One blow caught him on the cheekbone, a jarring impact that split the skin and sent a white-hot spear of pain through his head. The other connected with his temple, the force of it rattling his brain and his skull. Marcus stumbled back, the wooden chair toppling over with a deafening crash. The bailiffs, finally reacting, piled on Sterling, wrestling him to the ground. The judge was on his feet, his face a mask of shock and outrage. The courtroom was a maelstrom of shouting, screaming, and the frantic shuffling of feet. Marcus, his ears ringing, a warm, slick feeling spreading across his cheek, pushed himself to his feet. He saw the shocked, terrified faces of the jury, the horrified look on Anya Sharma's face, and the triumphant, unrepentant glare of Sterling, who was now being pinned to the floor by the two struggling bailiffs. The moment of chaos was fleeting. The judge's voice, a roar of authority, finally cut through the din. "This court is in recess. The defendant is in contempt. Bailiffs, take him to holding. Medics, get a medic in here." The courtroom doors flew open, and security guards flooded in. They were too late. The damage had been done. Marcus, his hand pressed to his bleeding cheek, felt a cold, professional detachment descend upon him. The pain was real, a sharp, throbbing ache, but his training allowed him to compartmentalize it. He was no longer a civilian witness. He was a U.S. Navy SEAL, and he had just been assaulted by a civilian in a federal courthouse. The implications of that were not lost on him. This was not a street fight. This was a direct, physical assault on a commissioned officer of the United States military. He was led out of the courtroom, the low murmurs and shocked whispers of the onlookers following him. A paramedic arrived, his movements efficient as he cleaned the cut and applied a butterfly bandage. "You're lucky it wasn't worse, sir," the medic said, his eyes filled with a kind of awe. "That guy was out for blood. I'm fine," Marcus said, his voice raspy. He looked at the bandage in the small mirror the medic held up. The cut was minor, but it was a mark, a brand, a symbol of a deeper sickness. He was taken to a small conference room. Anya Sharma came in, her face pale. "Marcus, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice filled with a tremor of shock. I never thought he would do something like that. It's not your fault, Marcus said, the professionalism returning in full force. He was already thinking, planning, and strategizing. The tactical problem was no longer in the courtroom. It was in the hands of the U.S. government. He pulled out his phone, a secure, government-issued device. He bypassed the civilian chain of command entirely. He didn't need to talk to the U.S. Attorney's office. This was no longer a matter of law. This was a matter of honor. He made a single call to a number he knew by heart, a number that belonged to Admiral James Bull Donovan, his commanding officer. The Admiral, a man of quiet authority and immense power, picked up on the second ring. "Thorne, what is it?" "I'm about to go into a briefing, Admiral," Marcus said, his voice as flat and emotionless as he could make it. "This is Marcus Thorne, reporting an incident." "An incident? Where are you?" "I am at the federal courthouse in D.C. I was here to testify in the Sterling case." During cross-examination, the defendant, Officer David Sterling, launched a physical assault against me. I have sustained a minor laceration to my face. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. A silence that spoke of disbelief, of fury, of a sudden and seismic shift in the situation. Then, Admiral Donovan's voice came back, cold and hard as steel. "Did you say a physical assault on a commissioned U.S. Navy officer in a federal building?" "Affirmative, sir." "Is the subject in custody?" "He is in the custody of the court bailiffs, sir. The situation is contained, but the subject is a threat to my safety and the safety of the public. He is unstable." "Understood. Remain where you are, Thorne. Do not engage with anyone. Do not make any further statements. Your official report will be made to us, and to us alone. I'm sending a detail. Over." "Understood, sir. Over and out." Marcus ended the call and placed the phone on the table. He leaned back in his chair, the throbbing in his cheek a distant, almost forgotten thing. He knew what was coming. The gears of the military legal machine had been set in motion. He didn't have to wait long. 2 miles away, at Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall, a rapid reaction military police detachment was scrambled. Sergeant First Class Jessica Jess Riley, a seasoned MP with a no-nonsense demeanor, listened to the orders as they crackled over the radio. Code red. High priority extraction. Federal courthouse, downtown. Assailant has assaulted a commissioned officer. We are to secure the scene, take the subject into military custody, and extract the officer. This is not a request. This is a direct order from the Admiral. Her team, all combat veterans, moved with an alarming and silent speed. They were armed not with tasers or pistols, but with M4 carbines and riot gear. They were a sight to behold, a team of professional soldiers, their faces grim, their movements a choreographed dance of lethal efficiency. This was not a police matter. It was a military matter. An attack on one of their own, especially a SEAL, was an attack on the entire institution. It was a line that should never have been crossed. The convoy, a fleet of armored black SUVs and tactical vans, roared out of the base, sirens wailing, lights flashing. The city traffic parted before them like the Red Sea. They were not there to uphold civilian law. They were there to enforce the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and to protect one of their own. Back at the courthouse, A surreal quiet had descended. The media, having gotten wind of the attack, had descended on the building like a flock of vultures. Reporters and cameramen clustered at the front entrance, shouting questions at anyone who came out. Inside, the judge was in his chambers. A stunned bailiff stood in the hallway, and in a holding cell in the basement. A furious and disoriented officer, Sterling, paced, yelling about a federal conspiracy and a race war. He had no idea what he had truly unleashed. A sudden, powerful sound of wailing sirens filled the air, cutting through the general noise. It wasn't the familiar, friendly whoop of a police car. This was a deeper, more aggressive sound, a sound of authority and finality. The media turned as one, their cameras zooming in on the approaching convoy of black vehicles. The SUVs came to a screeching halt, and the tactical vans deployed their occupants with military precision. Dozens of MPs clad in body armor, helmets, and armed with carbines poured out. Their movements were not rushed or panicked. They were calm, professional, and terrifyingly efficient. They formed a perimeter around the courthouse, their presence a stark, unmistakable statement. The local police, who had been milling about, looked on in confusion. A sergeant, a man with a tired face and a weary slump to his shoulders, approached the MP leader, Sergeant Riley. "What the hell is this?" he asked, a note of confused irritation in his voice. "This is a federal operation," Sergeant Riley said, her voice clipped, her eyes fixed on the entrance. "We have jurisdiction. The building is on lockdown. No one in, no one out. You can't just," the police sergeant began, but the sight of the heavily armed MPs and their cold, impassive faces made him swallow his words. He knew better than to argue with a force that moved with such purpose. Inside the courthouse, the MPs moved with the same terrifying efficiency. They bypassed the civilian guards and the scattered law enforcement officers. They went straight to the holding cells in the basement. The two bailiffs there, startled by the sight of the heavily armed MPs, backed away, their hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "Which one is Sterling?" Sergeant Riley asked, her voice a low rumble. "He's in there," one of the bailiffs said, pointing to the door. "But he's a cop. What are you doing?" "He is a civilian who assaulted a commissioned officer of the United States military," Riley said, her eyes boring into the man's soul. "He is under arrest on federal charges, and he is now our property." The MPs stormed the cell. Sterling, still full of a seething, racist fury, tried to resist, to tell them they had no right. But these were not the local beat cops he was used to intimidating. These were soldiers. They took him down with a fluid, practiced ease, cuffing him and hauling him to his feet. They led him out of the holding cell, up through the courthouse, and into the light of day. Sterling, a man who had always been so sure of his place, of his power, looked around in a daze. The sight of the military police, the flashing lights, the news cameras, and the sheer, overwhelming display of power seemed to break something inside of him. At the same time, Marcus was led from the conference room. He was surrounded by of his own, a silent and deadly shield. He saw the shocked faces of the reporters, the confused look on the faces of the local police, and the utter abject horror on the face of Sterling as he was led away. Sterling saw him then, a single glance that spoke a volume of terror and regret. He knew now, he had not just assaulted a black man. He had assaulted a SEAL, a member of an elite warrior class, a man who belonged to a brotherhood that had just demonstrated its unwavering, uncompromising loyalty. Marcus simply looked at him, his gaze as unwavering as before. The small butterfly bandage on his cheek, a testament to the foolishness of a man who had tried to solve a problem with violence instead of honor. The crowd of reporters began to shout, their voices a cacophony of questions. "Lieutenant Commander, what happened in there? What are these MPs doing? Are you okay?" Marcus said nothing. He simply walked, his back straight, his eyes fixed on the armored vehicle waiting for him. He was a man of action, not of words. The swift, decisive action of his military family was all the statement that was needed. The message was clear for the world to see: you do not touch one of their own. He got into the back of the SUV, the doors closing with a solid, reassuring thud. He was safe. He was home. He leaned his head against the glass, the pain in his cheek a dull ache now. The case against Officer David Sterling was far from over, but Marcus knew, with a certainty as sharp as a sniper's bullet, that the story had just changed. It was no longer a case about a dead teenager and a rogue cop. It was a case about the assault on a military officer, a matter of federal law, and the uncompromising will of the U.S. military to protect its own. And for David Sterling, the consequences of that simple, hateful act would be far greater than he could have ever imagined. He had traded a simple misdemeanor for a charge of federal assault on a commissioned officer, and in a single, foolish act of rage, he had signed away his freedom and his life. The last thing Marcus saw before the SUV pulled away was the flash of a dozen cameras. The image of him, a black Navy SEAL, under the protection of his military brethren, now a permanent fixture on the world's stage. It was a powerful, unforgettable image, a testament to the idea that honor, in the end, would always find a way to prevail.